All right, so yeah, today I'm going to be talking about why I think a lot of schools do a really terrible job of teaching foreign language. In general, is one of those things I noticed when I ended up graduating high school. I took Spanish for 2 years and I just hated it. And I'm a big fan of languages. And it wasn't that I had terrible teachers or anything like that. It was that it was set up in a way that made you really uninterested in going to class, in learning these other languages. And so I'm going to break it down into a few basic steps here. Number one of the biggest reasons why languages in schools are terrible is because they offer you languages that you're not necessarily interested in. They're technically the most practical languages, but practicality is only practical if you can use the language. In other words, I took Spanish for 2 years in high school. I barely speak Spanish, so it's not practical to learn Spanish. And that's most people who took Spanish in high school. If you have an interest in Spanish culture, I think you'll actually learn the language. So what I think number one schools need to start doing is they need to start implementing a lot more languages and not just like Spanish and French and Chinese and German. Like if those are the main ones, then I don't think that's the only ones that you could go for. I've met people who are head over heels about these really random languages like Navajo and stuff like that. And you know what? That's totally up to every single person. So that's one of the biggest things I think that the school system needs to change uh, with that. The other thing is stop telling kids, if you're an adult, stop telling kids that they have to learn Spanish because it's the most useful. No, it's not. If I speak Navajo because I was actually interested in Navajo, but I don't speak Spanish because I had no interest in Spanish and I took the same amount of years of courses, I'm going to actually have much more use out of the Navajo language. So that's a big key factor. Number two, the other big aspect to this is they don't teach you in a way that is interesting, and this is what I mean by that. For one of the first classes that I had ever was we had a list of animals, and then we had to say like, "Oh, my name is Mason," and so with a animal that starts with an M, I think mine was the word for monkey. So it was like Monkey Mason, and so we had to like go around the room and learn everybody's name with the animal, the Spanish word for the animal, um, in each of those. And stuff like that, I get people are trying to make it fun and unique, but it doesn't. It actually makes it really boring, and you barely learn in the process. So I think for the second step is you have to teach in a much more creative outlet, which, in other words, say you're taking German. Learn with a class where you have to learn how to make Wiener Schnitzel and drink maybe because you can't drink in high school, but say you take like a sip of beer or something like that, and you teach in these fun, unique ways, and so you learn how to deal with it in a more entertaining and a more creative outlet. The third piece is I find a lot of times that we have a very small amount of time allotted to language. We spend a lot of time in high school learning English, which is a language that you're fluent in by the time you're 14 years old. And there is a benefit to English, and I understand that. But if you really want to start increasing the bilingualism in the United States, especially with English, I remember there's a big portion of English class was just studying poetry, studying all these different things, which is beneficial, and I understand the benefit to that. Um, but for example, when I was a freshman in high school, I knew I didn't want to go into engineering. There was just no aspect of engineering that I was really interested in. I had already finished Algebra 1. There's really no point of math after Algebra 1, to be 100% honest, if you're not going to go into a field in math. So I think schools, specifically high schools in general, should start kind of switching this idea and start having kids focus on things they're more interested in. And even if they make language a part of that requirement, there's only 2 years required of language, but there's 4 years required of math in most schools. And same with English. English has 4 years as well, which is just absolutely absurd considering that there is much more practicality to actually speaking a foreign language than continuously learning the language that you already speak. And the last point I want to make here is it's not as important, but I do think it does hold some grounds in general. I think there needs to be a push for field trips to foreign countries. And I know some people can't afford it, but like I was saying before, like even if you're taking Spanish, um, it's not very hard to drive to Mexico. If you get a bus, you can drive to Mexico. I would say with a class of 35 kids, relatively cheap for even for just a couple days. Get people involved in the culture. I actually did missions work when I was in Nicaragua, and I hated Spanish, but the 10 days or 11 days, whatever it was, that I was in Nicaragua, I learned way more Spanish than when I was in class for 2 years learning Spanish. It is just, there is such a difference to meeting people from that culture and being able to communicate with them instead of the teacher who learned Spanish in high school, became pretty fluent in it, and then had a decent experience in a Spanish speaking country and then came back and decides to teach. Um, you learn a language from the native speakers. I personally think a lot better than the from the teachers who learn the language. I mean, for me personally, if I was to suggest who would you want to take German lessons from, me or somebody who's born in Germany or Austria, I would always recommend going with somebody from Germany or Austria. I know I might have a different understanding because I'm a second language learner of it. So I do have, I guess, a benefit when it comes to it, but there is a significant difference to being able to talk and meet people from the native country. That's the whole reason you're learning the language in the first place, is to actually communicate in it and talk to people. Um, yeah. So yeah, this is just my 2 cents on this. This is just something I've been noticing in general that kind of bothered me when I was in high school. Um, the big four things are: the creativity is, I think, a huge thing. The requirement of what's the most practical is also a big thing. Um, yeah, just all the points I made in this. So if you guys, I don't know how we would move this anywhere, but I think in general this does need to be said. Um, so yeah, if you like this video, if you agree with me, like. If you don't agree with me, leave down in the comments. If you write a big long paragraph, I might read it. If it's super negative and like 20 pages long, I'm definitely not going to read it. So yeah, if you're new, subscribe. I will be making videos when I get back from the UK, which will be the end of April. So yeah, if you guys want to, like and subscribe, and I will see you guys then. Thank you. Bye.